I still hear her voice the way it cut through the room, sharp enough to stop every sound around us. "Dad, stop talking about Mom. Just stop." She said it loud enough that the two people standing by the counter turned their heads, then pretended not to. I froze where I stood, feeling the air shift. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way she said them, like remembering her mother was some kind of offense, like our memories were a burden she didn't want to carry anymore. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wasn't expecting kindness, but I wasn't prepared for that sudden coldness. For a moment, I felt smaller than the floor beneath me. My own daughter looking at me like I had crossed a line by loving the woman who raised her. I remember studying her face, searching for the child I used to know. The one who cried when her mother brushed her hair. The one who used to sleep with her mother's old scarf tucked under her chin. None of that was there anymore. Her eyes were hard, restless, almost annoyed that I had brought up the woman who gave her life. What hurt most wasn't just the dismissal. It was the familiarity in her tone, like she had spoken this way before, like she had practiced being distant. I slid my hand into my pocket without thinking, feeling the small circle of metal I kept there. Her mother's ring, the one she wore every day, even toward the end when her hands trembled too much to hold a cup. I kept it with me because touching it reminded me I had once been loved fully, completely. It reminded me of the promise we made to raise our daughter with patience and kindness. But standing there, hearing my daughter speak as if those memories were nothing, made the ring feel heavier than ever. I didn't take it out. I didn't want anyone to see the way my fingers shook. She looked past me, not at me. "You talk about her too much," she said, quieter this time but with the same cold edge. "It's time to move on." Move on, as if grief had an expiration date, as if her mother's name was something to sweep away because it didn't fit her life anymore. In that moment, something deeper stirred in me. Unease, suspicion, fear. It felt like she wasn't only pushing away her mother's memory. She was pushing away everything that tied her to this family, everything that made us who we were. I didn't know why she wanted distance, but I could feel it growing like a shadow between us. And the way she spoke, it didn't sound like her voice alone. Someone else had shaped that tone. Someone who convinced her that love was something to outgrow. If you were standing in my place, hearing your child silence the memory of the person you loved most, what would you do? Her visits used to feel like a small piece of life returning to the house, shoes by the door, a quick hug, a familiar voice filling the rooms. But slowly, almost quietly, those moments thinned out. The warmth faded first, then the time, then the feeling that she was actually there to see me at all. She started arriving later than she said she would, leaving earlier than she planned. Sometimes she'd stand just inside the doorway, glancing at her phone like she was checking how much longer she had to endure being in the same room as me. She never said it out loud, but the message sat between us every time. I don't want to be here. I tried to talk about her mother, just a small story, a gentle reminder of the woman who held our family together. But she would brush it aside with a sigh or a quick change of topic. One afternoon, I showed her an old photo I had framed, a picture of her mother holding her as a baby. She didn't even look at it. "Dad, you keep too much stuff," she said, waving her hand at the frame like it was dust I needed to wipe away. "You don't need all these old things." Those old things were pieces of the life we once had, pieces I was still holding on to because they were all I had left of the woman I loved. But to my daughter, They were clutter, evidence of emotions she didn't want to deal with anymore. I could feel her pulling away from anything that reminded her of loss, as if avoiding grief made her stronger. Then came the comments I knew weren't hers, the ones shaped by someone else's voice. "Dad, maybe you shouldn't depend on memories so much," she told me one day, almost word for word the way her partner had said it during a dinner months earlier. It wasn't the kind of thing she used to say. It was something taught, something repeated until it stuck. Her partner's influence showed in other ways too. When she walked through the house, she'd glance around like she was evaluating it. Not with curiosity or concern, but with judgment, as if she were reporting back to someone who needed her to inspect things. Her eyes lingered on my shelves, on my old furniture, on the photographs I refused to take down. And every time she left, I felt like I needed to defend the life I lived inside those walls. I noticed the shift, but I kept telling myself it was stress, work, or her trying to find her own place in the world. I wanted to believe she was still the girl who once held my hand in crowded stores and whispered that she'd always need me. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who found my memories inconvenient, someone who saw my grief as something to correct. And as her visits became shorter, colder, and filled with silence, I felt the first real seeds of abandonment settle into my chest. Quiet, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The first document came in a plain envelope with no return address. I almost threw it away. It looked like one of those generic letters you get when a company wants to sell you insurance. But when I opened it, my name was printed at the top beside my daughter's, as if we had both agreed to some joint property review. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it was a mistake or some clerical mix-up. But the more I read, the more I realized someone had been discussing assets I hadn't touched since my wife passed. I asked my daughter about it the next time she visited. She barely looked up from her phone. "Dad, it's just future planning," she said, brushing it off like I was bothering her with a question that didn't matter. "Everyone does this. You worry too much." But I knew she hadn't talked to me about any of it. And future planning didn't explain why her partner's email address was listed in the digital contact section at the bottom. It also didn't explain why the letter suggested an evaluation of my capacity to maintain long-term property ownership. That part made something tighten in my chest. I read it twice more, slower, letting the words land where they wanted to hurt. A week later, I found another envelope tucked under a stack of old magazines near the front door. This one contained a request for information about items in my house, furniture, valuables, and even jewelry that belonged to my wife. The form included subtle questions about who had access to my belongings and whether I needed assistance organizing or reallocating them. I felt sick reading it. My wife's ring, the one I kept in my pocket every day, wasn't listed. But the thought that someone wanted to inventory her things made my hands shake. When I showed that letter to my daughter, she rolled her eyes. "It's normal, Dad. You don't have to get emotional about everything." She said it with a tone so cold I barely recognized her. It wasn't grief in her voice, it was annoyance, as if my memories, my belongings, and my questions were inconveniences she had to tolerate. Her partner's influence became clearer with every new document. The signatures on the digital trails weren't mine, but they included my name. The email notifications were sent to an address I didn't recognize, and each request hinted at something dangerous. Reviews, evaluations, access permissions. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. Someone was planning ahead. But they weren't planning for my future. They were planning for theirs. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down every date, every odd phrase, every envelope that didn't feel right. It felt strange, like guarding myself from my own child. But something inside told me I needed a record. I needed proof. My biggest fear wasn't losing my property or decisions. It was losing the last pieces of my wife, the things she touched, the memories I protected. The documents didn't just question my autonomy. They threatened the only traces of her I still held on to. And for the first time, I felt a warning louder than any letter. Someone was trying to erase more than my name. What would you do if paperwork appeared with your name already involved, but without your consent? I first heard it from my neighbor, a man who had known my wife since the day we moved in. He stopped me by the mailbox and spoke with that careful tone people use when they think you're fragile. "Your daughter mentioned you've been struggling," he said softly, as if every word might bruise me. "She worries you can't move on." I felt my fingers tighten around the mail. My daughter had never said those words to my face, but now they were floating through the neighborhood like smoke, thin, persistent, and impossible to ignore. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound died before it left my throat. I walked back to the house feeling smaller than I had that morning. By the end of the week, 2 church members pulled me aside after service. One gently asked if I needed counseling. The other said she was praying for my emotional stability. I stood there, stunned, listening to them repeat phrases my daughter must have used: stuck in the past, can't move forward, fragile since his wife died. These weren't words of concern. They were labels, stitched to my back without my knowledge. And as I pieced together what they said, the shape of a story emerged. One she was crafting slowly, methodically. A story in which I wasn't grieving. I was losing control. Her partner played his part too. I overheard him once, whispering to a friend, "He's not well. He dwells on things. It's unhealthy at his age." He said it with confidence, as if he'd spent years studying me, as if he had earned the right to decide what was healthy for me. His tone wasn't worried. It was strategic, the kind of voice a person uses when they want others to nod in agreement. When I finally confronted my daughter, I did it gently. We stood in the living room, sunlight coming in through the lace curtains my wife had sewn. I asked her why she was telling people I couldn't let go. I expected surprise, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, she gave me a cold, level stare. "Dad, you are obsessed," she said plainly. "Mom's gone. You act like she's still here. It's not normal. People see that." Her certainty hit harder than any insult. She didn't raise her voice or look angry. She looked convinced, calm, practiced, as if she'd rehearsed the line. That was when I understood this wasn't careless gossip. This was preparation. A foundation she was laying for something bigger. Something that needed the community to doubt me before she took the next step. After that day, I noticed how people hesitated before believing me. How they watched me longer before answering. The trust I had built over decades was slipping from their hands, replaced by a version of me she had planted. A fragile old man who lived too much in the past. My memories weren't an obsession. They were my connection to the woman who loved me. But in her story, they had become a weakness she could exploit. And for the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. It began with her walking through the house as if she were inspecting a storage unit rather than her childhood home. She paused in each room, eyes scanning shelves and drawers with a kind of clinical detachment. "Dad, you need to clean out these old things," she said flatly. It's not healthy to keep holding on. I knew what she meant. Her mother's things. The photos, the scarves, the recipe books still open to the pages she used the most. My daughter's gaze lingered on them with impatience, as if they were trash I'd forgotten to take out. I tried to explain that I wasn't ready to let go, but my words floated past her untouched. Just donate them, she said, or sell them. People buy vintage stuff. She said it like the items were meaningless, objects with no stories, no weight. But every piece she pointed at was tied to a moment I remembered vividly. Our first holiday, her mother humming in the kitchen. The day we bought matching rings. My daughter looked at those memories and saw potential profit. It wasn't until she opened the jewelry box that I felt real danger. She reached for the tray containing her mother's necklace and bracelets, the ones she used to wear on Sundays. These could sell for a good amount, she murmured. There's no reason to keep them locked up. Her hand hovered a moment too long, and then she said, almost casually, "Where's Mom's ring? The gold one? That would bring in some real money." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The ring was in my pocket, right where it had been every day since my wife passed. It was the one thing I couldn't leave in a drawer for anyone to take. My thumb brushed against it, hidden in the fabric, as if touching it could shield it from her curiosity. Her partner appeared in the doorway then, leaning casually against the frame. "Liquidating assets is smart," he said. "Why let things sit around? He's not using any of it." His tone was smooth, practiced. I could tell he'd had this conversation with her before they arrived. That was when I noticed something unsettling. Their urgency wasn't emotional. It was strategic. They weren't trying to help me heal. They were preparing to divide what wasn't theirs yet. My grief wasn't an obstacle to them. It was an opportunity. "Dad," she said again, "we should go through everything now. You don't need to hold on to any of this." Her eyes flicked once more toward the jewelry box, hungry for what it might contain. I stepped between her and the dresser. "Not today," I said quietly. She frowned. He sighed. The air in the room tightened. In that moment, it became painfully clear they wanted not only to erase the traces of her mother, but to profit from what she left behind. It wasn't grief driving them. It was financial hunger dressed up as concern. I stayed silent. Fingers curled around the ring. It was the last piece of my wife I could still protect. What would you protect if it was the last piece of your loved one left? The first warning didn't come from me. It came from the bank. I had gone in for something simple, ordering new checks. When the teller, a woman who had known me for years, pulled me aside with quiet urgency. She lowered her voice and said, "Someone has been asking questions about your accounts, Mr. Dalton. Questions only an authorized owner should ask." She didn't say my daughter's name, but she didn't have to. I felt a slow, cold weight settle over me. I asked what kind of questions. She hesitated, then answered. Inquiries about balances, withdrawal limits, and whether medical incapacity would transfer control. The words cut deeper than anything my daughter had said to my face. This wasn't curiosity. This was groundwork. Later that same week, my doctor called. He sounded uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. "Your daughter requested copies of your medical records," he told me. "She also asked whether you'd been showing signs of memory decline." I sat in my chair, gripping the phone, feeling the room grow smaller. I had never once discussed confusion or forgetfulness with her. But she was planting that idea everywhere she could. When I told my lawyer, he didn't look surprised. He sighed, folded his hands, and said, "Start documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations, any paperwork she tries to bring into this house. He explained that elder exploitation often starts with subtle narrative shifts, rumors of incompetence, sudden concern about finances, unnecessary pressure to sign forms. Hearing it laid out so plainly made me feel both exposed and strangely validated. I wasn't imagining the changes. They were real, predictable, and dangerous. 2 days later, a pair of officers came to the house. Protective services had been notified by the bank and my doctor. They said they needed to ask a few questions. Their tone was calm but serious. I answered everything honestly. When the pressure started, what she'd tried to take, what I'd overheard. They listened carefully, taking notes, pausing whenever I had to steady myself. They interviewed my daughter afterward. I wasn't there, but they summarized her responses. She denied everything, of course. She called it a misunderstanding, said she was only trying to help, accused me of being emotional. But the officers noticed something else. Her tone, her defensiveness, the quick flashes of irritation when they pressed her. Hostility doesn't hide well under stress. Her partner did worse. Under questioning, he contradicted himself repeatedly, said he'd never touched my financial matters, then admitted to reviewing a few things for her. Claimed he barely knew my medical history, then referenced specific doctors I'd visited. His answers tangled themselves into the kind of knots that only come from guilty hands. When the officers returned to me, their voices held no doubt. "There are clear signs of attempted interference," one said. "This fits the pattern of elder financial exploitation." Hearing those words out loud was like having someone finally name the shadow that had been following me for months. It hurt deeply, but it also gave me resolve. For the first time, someone besides me saw exactly what she had become. The day of the hearing felt heavier than any morning I had faced since losing my wife. I sat in a small room outside the courtroom, hands folded tightly, the ring warm in my pocket like it understood what was at stake. My lawyer spoke quietly beside me, explaining what would happen. But my mind drifted through decades of sacrifice. Late nights working overtime, skipping vacations, saving every dollar so my daughter would never struggle the way I did. I never imagined I'd be here fighting to keep her from dismantling the life I built. When we finally entered the room, everything moved slowly and clearly, as if the weight of the truth demanded silence. The judge read through the findings. Unauthorized inquiries into my accounts, attempts to obtain medical records, misleading statements about my mental state, and pressure to liquidate assets that didn't belong to her. Each detail landed like a quiet blow, not because I doubted them, but because hearing them confirmed how far she had gone. My daughter sat across from me, arms crossed, eyes cold. Her partner sat beside her, but his confidence had vanished. The investigation had made it clear he was the one pushing the financial agenda, encouraging her, advising her, even drafting messages on her behalf. When the judge addressed him directly, he stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The court issued restrictions immediately. She was barred from accessing any of my accounts, from making medical requests, from entering my home without written consent. His name was added to the list as well. The judge emphasized that their actions aligned with patterns of elder exploitation. The words hung in the room, sharp and unforgiving. They tried to argue, but every denial unraveled under documented evidence. My notes, the bank alerts, the inconsistencies in their statements. Next came protections. My accounts were locked with newly added safeguards. My home and belongings, especially anything tied to my wife, were formally designated as mine alone. Even the jewelry box my daughter reached for was listed in the protective order. The lawyer made sure the ring, her ring, was noted by description, even though I never let it out of my pocket. These weren't just items. They were the last threads of a life I had loved. And now the law recognized their value, not in money, but in meaning. As the judgment finalized, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't revenge. This was prevention. A shield between their ambition and my vulnerability. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt old, tired, but steadier than I had in months. When we left the courthouse, my lawyer asked how I felt. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the sky, then at the steps beneath my feet. I feel protected, I finally said. And that's more than I expected. Accountability had its place, but trust, once broken, couldn't be restored in a courtroom. Is accountability enough when trust is already gone? The house feels quieter now. But it's a quiet I've learned to accept. Not the kind that waits for footsteps that never come, or for a daughter who once filled this place with laughter. It's the quiet of understanding, of finally seeing what was broken and choosing not to carry the pieces anymore. I sit at the kitchen table most mornings, the same place my wife used to sip her tea, and I think about the years we built together, the love we protected, the promises we kept, and I think about how quickly someone tried to erase all of it. Some days the grief hits harder than others. Losing my wife was one kind of pain, sharp, honest, rooted in love. Losing my daughter in this slow, calculated way was something colder. It wasn't death. It was betrayal. A choice. A turning away. I remind myself that I survived both, but only one left me with something worth holding on to. The ring sits in my palm as I speak these words, the metal warm from my skin. I turn it over, tracing the small engraving inside, the initials she and I chose when we were barely more than kids. This ring has lived through every chapter of my life. It doesn't shine like it used to, but loyalty doesn't need to shine. It only needs to stay. I kept it in my pocket through every moment of this ordeal. Not because I was hiding it from my daughter, but because it was the one thing she couldn't twist into something useful to her, the one thing she couldn't take or sell or rename. It belonged to memory, not money, to love, not leverage. I've accepted now that she may never come home again, at least not in any way that matters. And I've stopped waiting for an apology that would only smooth the surface while the damage stayed beneath it. Forgiveness isn't owed to someone who calls your grief an inconvenience. It isn't owed to someone who sees your history as clutter and your vulnerability as opportunity. The courts did what they needed to do. They put boundaries in place, protected my home, secured my accounts, and ensured no one could touch what my wife and I spent a lifetime building. But justice, I've learned, is not about punishing the heart. It's about protecting it. The law can secure your property, but only you can decide who has access to your peace. So I've made my choice. I'll honor my wife by remembering her without shame. I'll honor myself by living the years I have left without fear. And I will honor the truth by accepting that love cannot survive where entitlement grows. As I close my hand around the ring, I feel a strength I thought I had lost. Gratitude doesn't belong to those who demand it. It belongs to the memories that survive, to the love that remains when everything else falls away. Should a parent forgive a child who tries to erase the person they loved most?